You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 7th of May 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's programme. India and Pakistan near yet another war over Kashmir. We'll have the latest from both sides and ask what it would take to de-escalate. After that, we explore the new Syrian leader's first trip to Europe, and then...
In the days leading up to the meeting, the scene being set from the American side didn't appear to be leading a particularly friendly meeting.
Monocle's Thomas Lewis brings us the latest from the high-stakes meeting between Mark Carney and Donald Trump. We'll also, of course, have the latest from the Vatican conclave getting underway today, including the view from the Vatican and from Brazil. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. India and Pakistan have fought 4 wars over nearly 8 decades, including one shortly after India's partition in 1947. They are now in danger of nearing a 5th. Kashmir has almost always been at the centre of these conflicts, and it is once again today. A militant attack on tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir last month has now prompted a series of Indian strikes on Pakistan, which denies responsibility for those Kashmir attacks, but has vowed to retaliate against India and defend its territory. Both sides are insisting they don't want a full-scale war, but also disagree on who should take the lead in de-escalating the situation. Well, joining me now is Lindy Prickett, Monocle's New Delhi correspondent, and Saima Tariq, researcher and journalist in Islamabad. Saima, I want to start with you. What can you tell us from your perspective and where you are about what's happened in the last 24 hours?
Hi. So, of course, at about 2 a.m. last night, Pakistan time, 9 non-military targets were struck by the Indian government in Pakistan-controlled Kashmir. Here in Islamabad, which is about maybe 140 kilometers from the line of control, things are actually feeling pretty quiet. So, I was out and about today, and the Srinagar Highway, which is the major thoroughfare through the city, named obviously after the largest city in Indian-occupied Kashmir, was practically empty of traffic. So schools and colleges have been closed today, and the usually bustling markets are really quiet. There's not been an increase in sort of military or checkpoint presence. But I do feel that though the shops and small businesses are open, it feels like people who don't need to be out and about aren't going out.
And Lindy, to bring you in here, India says that it targeted terrorist sites, not military or civilian installations. As Saima said there as well, it was not military installations. But this obviously came in response to this attack on Indian-administered Kashmir. What has India said about what it targeted and what it achieved?
Well, it's had some pretty slick branding, actually. It's calling it Operation Sindoor, and it's definitely trying to say that it's struck 9 terror sites. Some people have said terror camps. And, there's a big thing between the two countries about Pakistan describing certain people as non-state actors. And they've often said that they're victims of terror. So if you remember in the run-up to this, Prime Minister Modi was very careful not to actually use the word Pakistan when he was talking about retribution. So I think that a lot of people are hoping that the strike, though fierce and really something that has shook everybody, a lot of people to the core, they're hoping that because they were non-military targets, that there's going to be a good face saver and a way of standing down. Earlier, we even heard from Pakistan's defense minister, who said his military was ready to refrain from further action if India halts its operations. Some people think, maybe that's just a bluff, but I think there's a lot of people here hoping that that is indeed the case, and that this is where the tit and the tat ends, and that it will escalate no further.
Saima, what is your sense of that from Pakistan? It has called for restraint, but also sort of vowed to retaliate if needed at a time and place of its choosing. Does Pakistan accept this characterization from India when you hear from Pakistan officials there that India is targeting non-state actors and not Pakistan itself?
Well, I mean, this is a very sort of military-centered country. Obviously, the military is the de facto ruler here. And sort of in the last couple of years, there's actually been unprecedented sort of creeping anti-army sentiment given the arrest of Imran Khan, the former prime minister, and the crackdown against his party, the PTI. So what's happening today actually is probably quite good for the Pakistani army. And from the vox pops that I'm seeing on the news and the general feeling on the media, with political rivals joining sort of TV debates, is that they're willing to put aside their sort of political differences and their constant sort of catfighting in the name of national unity. So this is looking good for the army. And I mean, it's hard to really understand what the feeling is on the ground. I mean, it's such a large and divided country with so much else going on in Balochistan and also in the northern areas. But I would say that generally, of course, people would hope that this is not going to escalate any further.
Lindy, you said that India is hopeful of de-escalation. Are they saying that what they have done, these strikes, these 9 strikes, are all that they need to do at this point? Is there anything further that we might expect from India?
I've heard many. So far from the official stance, it's just a reflection on what has happened without any clue about what is going to be coming up. Although I think everybody's kind of standing their ground. I've heard many pundits talk about this tactic from the Indian side as being a siege tactic, in the sense that they're trying to kind of squeeze some of its resources and hit it where it hurts. So we know about the Indus Water Treaty, where very important rivers and water and irrigation, that for irrigation, electricity, so many things that flow from India, which the two countries have signed a treaty ages ago, decades ago, saying that they will sort of both share it. To put it in very simple terms, India has said we are suspending that agreement. It doesn't necessarily have the capability to store tons and tons of water and do lots of damage, but it certainly can play havoc with people whose lives and livelihoods depend on that water. So I think that that's one pressure point. Another pressure point is the flyover. That's money, right? If you're not going to be flying your many planes across your airways, then you're losing income and revenue there. Saima also mentioned the Balochistan issue in the West. All of these things cost a lot of money. So a lot of pundits here are saying, maybe the tactic is trying to just squeeze Pakistan a bit so that they feel the pressure on many different fronts, not just missiles going across the border, but on many fronts, and that there would be less of an appetite to engage in something that, let's face it, would be awful and expensive.
Lindy Prickett in New Delhi and Saima Tariq in Islamabad, thank you very much both for joining us. We'll be continuing to follow this story, I'm sure. But now here's Monica Lillis with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. Serbian President Alexander Vučić will attend Russia's Victory Day military parade in Moscow this week. It's a move that risks a serious rupture with Brussels, underscoring Serbia's increasingly ambivalent stance to EU enlargement. He and Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico will be the only European leaders to attend the May 9th commemoration. The Catholic Church will soon begin the highly choreographed process of choosing its new leader following the death of Pope Francis last month. Today's events began with a special mass for the election of the Roman pontiff. After a break, the cardinals will head to the Sistine Chapel, which will be under lockdown for the conclave. Samsung Electronics audio subsidiary Harman International will acquire the audio business of US-based Massimo, marking the Korean company's first high-profile acquisition in 9 years. Under the deal, Massimo audio brands including B&W, Denon, Marantz, Polk Audio and Definitive Technology will join Harman's existing portfolio. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Monica. France is welcoming Syria's new interim president, Ahmed al-Shara, for his first visit to Europe. The visit comes as Emmanuel Macron says he wants to support a new Syria, But while many are hopeful that Syria can turn the corner, the reality on the ground does remain somewhat chaotic. There has been sectarian violence, Israeli airstrikes, all leaving some doubts about who is actually in charge. Well, I'm joined now by Monocle's Istanbul correspondent, Hannah Lucinda Smith, who has also been to Syria quite recently, to look at the significance of all of this. And Hannah, first of all, just how surprising is it to see Paris hosting Ahmed al-Sharaa? He is, of course, after all, also a former Islamist rebel.
Yeah, well, of course, Ahmed al-Sharaa is in fact still on a travel ban, according to the UN. France will have had to got a special dispensation for him to visit. And, the country that he rules, Syria, and the group that he rules as well, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, the group that displaced Bashar al-Assad back in December, also still under sanctions, particularly from the US, although those are being lifted. So in one sense, it is absolutely extraordinary to see this figure who 10 years ago was one of the most feared terrorists in the world, particularly in Europe, which was seeing a wave of Al-Qaeda and ISIS attacks across European capitals. To see him now today visiting as a statesman is extraordinary. But on another sense, if we look at it historically, of course, France has this deep interest in the Levantine region, particularly in Syria and in Beirut. It had a colonial interest there. It still is quite heavily involved in its politics, particularly when it comes to the kind of protection of Christian minorities. So one of the things that Macron is going to be looking for from Ahmed al-Sharaa is a confirmation, reassurance that he is going to be looking after Syria's minorities in the wake of these recent attacks.
And what will al-Sharaa be looking for from France? It is significant, even though, as you say, that France has played a significant role in this region for a long time, that he picked France as the first European country to visit. What is he looking to gain from it?
Well, of course, what Sharaa wants, first of all, is the lifting of sanctions to allow Syria to start functioning again as a sovereign state. At the moment, its economy and its infrastructure have been completely destroyed by this 14-year civil war that it lived through. And also it's been cut off as well by the sanctions that were placed on Bashar al-Assad's regime. They cut off Syria's banking system. They stopped its businesses from trading with the world. While Syria is in this position where it can't restart itself, it leaves it really, really open to the kind of foreign interference that you mentioned at the start, Chris, which is, Israel coming in and basically sort of creeping into Syrian territory. It looks like they want to sort of take control or de facto control of more and more areas close to its border. Also Turkey as well, what kind of influence, it will wield. But for Sharaa, immediately, there is the, immediate promise of some quite big contracts. We're already seeing some French companies going back into the Syrian market. So, for example, just in the past few days, a huge French company signed a 30-year contract to run Latakia port. That was run by a French company before 2011. And then during the war was handed to Iranian management. So you see the kind of geopolitics playing out in the business sector as well.
And just finally, Hannah, when it comes to those sanctions, obviously France, given what you mentioned there too, businesses going into Syria, has an interest in those sanctions being lifted. So does Europe. What exactly will that take? It's not just assurances, it is actions. Presumably a big part of that is an inclusive Syrian government, among other things. What kind of actions does Sharaa really need to show to get to that final or most important step?
I think this is the question that a lot of Syrians are asking. The really interesting thing when I was in Damascus and talking to people about, this sudden change of regime and the new rulers that they're now living under, that hardly anyone I met was, wholly enthusiastic about Ahmed al-Sharaa and his group. They're very concerned that there might be a situation like Afghanistan where, this new regime promises things, but then actually in the end, reverts to sort of typical Islamist type. But also they said, we have nothing else to work with. Here's the thing. So they're saying, what level of proof does Europe or America, the West generally need? And at what point does it actually become impossible to prove? You're sort of trying to prove a negative almost that that you're not going to start repressing minorities. But of course, for Sharaa, the biggest problem I think is these recent attacks. First of all, on the Alawite minority in the coastal regions, and then in the past week on the Druze minority close Damascus. I think, the more that incidents like these erupt, the more that, European leaders are going to start questioning how firm his control over his group is.
Hannah Lucinda Smith, Monocle's Istanbul correspondent, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermack. At the White House yesterday, Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, met with US President Donald Trump. It was their first in-person series of talks since Canada's election last week, which of course surprised everybody by bringing Mark Carney back into power. Monocle's Toronto correspondent Thomas Lewis spoke to us earlier with this assessment of the meeting.
Well, I don't think it's overstating it to say that the attention on Mark Carney's visit to the White House on Tuesday and the pressure even from Canadians watching on at home was really quite pronounced, given that Mark Carney had anchored his entire election campaign on being the person able to stand up to the US president and to the US's hostilities against Canada's economy. So I think there really was a lot of attention on how Mark Carney would translate the fairly strong rhetoric against the US's actions against Canada's economy into practice in a face-to-face meeting with the president in the Oval Office. And, in the days leading up to the meeting, the scene being set from the American side didn't appear to be leading to a particularly friendly meeting. The US president, during a press conference on Monday, said in so many words that he wasn't quite sure why Mark Carney was coming to Washington at all. The US president's trade envoy, Howard Lutnick, he also repeated in an interview on television these claims made by the US side about Canada's economy. But when the press conference began and the two leaders were sitting next to each other, the words from the US president towards Canada's new Prime Minister couldn't have been warmer.
But I just want to congratulate you, and ran a really great race. I watched the debate. I thought you were excellent. And I think we have a lot of things in common. We have some tough points to go over, and that'll be fine.
And Mark Carney's tone was different to that he deployed during the election campaign, in that his opening remarks were fairly warm towards the US president. But I think quite cannily, he styled Donald Trump's leadership as being transformational, but also linked that to how Canada under his leadership was also beginning on a period of transformation too.
You're a transformational president, focus on the economy with a relentless focus on the American worker, securing your borders, ending the scourge of fentanyl and other opioids, and securing the world. And I've been elected with my colleagues here, with the help of my colleagues here. I'm going to spread the credit. To transform Canada with a similar focus on the economy, securing our borders, again on fentanyl, much greater focus on defense and security, securing the Arctic and developing the Arctic. And the history of Canada and the U.S. is we're stronger when we work together, and there's many opportunities to work together. And I look forward to, addressing some of those issues that we have, but also finding those areas of mutual cooperation so we can move forward.
That's great. Very nice. Thank you very much. It's a very nice statement.
And while it was the US president that did most of the talking, there has been some commentary in the Canadian media that they had wanted to see Mark Carney perhaps interject more, a little like we saw from France's President Emmanuel Macron and the UK's Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer during their meetings earlier this year in the Oval Office. Anyone who will have followed the Canadian election campaign will know that it's not really Mark Carney's style to do that, even during the prime ministerial debates in Canada. While other leaders were jumping all over each other on the debate stage, Mark Carney was the person who was making notes quietly, diligently, and speaking when his turn came in a fairly intentional way. And when Mark Carney did speak, I think it is fair to say that he did land the clear points that I think most Canadians will have wanted to hear him say as explicitly as he did in the White House on Tuesday.
As you know from real estate, there are some places that that are never for sale.
That's true.
We're sitting in one right now, Buckingham Palace that you visited as well.
That's true.
And having met with the owners of Canada over the course of the campaign last several months, it's not for sale, won't be for sale ever.
I think in many ways it's what came after the meeting from the American side that really did confirm, for the time being at least, a real shift in tone from the Trump administration towards Canada. It was a few hours after the meetings had concluded that the official White House social media accounts published this pretty stylish video summarising the meeting, featuring swelling strains of background music overlaid with choice clips from each leader heaping praise on the other, which, given how high the rhetoric has been from either side over the past few months, really, would have been kind of hard to imagine this kind of glowing piece of praise for Canada's new Prime Minister even a few weeks ago.
The history of Canada and the U.S. is we're stronger when we work together, and there's many opportunities to work together, and I look forward to finding those areas of mutual cooperation.
Monocle's Toronto correspondent Thomas Lewis there. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now, in case you haven't heard, there is a conclave underway today in the Vatican. 133 Catholic cardinals are in St. Peter's Basilica, set to meet behind closed doors to choose a new leader of the Catholic Church after Pope Francis. Christopher White is the Vatican correspondent for National Catholic Reporter based in Rome. Christopher, great to have you on the show on this very important day in Rome. Tell us first of all about the ritual mass this morning, which sort of started things off.
Sure. This is obviously an intense time where all eyes were on the Dean of the College of Cardinals. He's the man who has been presiding over these pre-conclave meetings in recent days, these sort of secretive, closed room discussions about the future of the church. And this was, a sense, his final word before they head into the Sistine Chapel to give their first ballots later today. And, he didn't especially put his thumb on the scale in favor of any one direction or candidate. He said, look, now is a time to preserve the unity of the church, but recognizing that this is also a time when we have to respect the diversity of it as well and try to find a balance between the two.
Now, Christopher, a first ballot is already expected today. Walk us through the process until that happens.
Sure. So right now, the College of Cardinals, they are having lunch together. They have now been officially sequestered, meaning they've turned over all of their electronic devices. Vatican cell service has been switched off for the duration of the conclave. So they are locked in there together. They will have lunch, they will have a rest, and then at 4:30 this afternoon local time, they will gather together in prayer, and then they will process into the Sistine Chapel, where they will take an oath before God to cast ballots for the person they believe to be the best person to lead the Catholic Church. It will be a pretty heady experience for most of them, I'm sure, because they will be, staring at Michelangelo's famous painting of the final judgment there, of bodies being condemned to heaven or to hell. And that's where it all begins. There will not be any speeches made in the Sistine Chapel. This will be a time where they just gather to cast their first votes. And that's critical because that's when they will have a sense of who the candidates are that are really going to decide the outcome of this election, where there are blocks of people supporting one cardinal or another, and what fault lines continue to exist.
And Christopher, there's been so much speculation, of course, up to this point. Do favorites even matter on this day? It does feel like every prediction goes out the window now that the Cardinals are meeting.
Yeah, no one expects a new pope to be elected tonight, but tonight's vote is very important because it gives a sense of the mood of the room. If someone that's been whispered as a potential frontrunner fails to gain a substantive number of votes, then that candidacy may be written off immediately, and folks might be more eager to switch their votes behind someone else that they think might get elected. So after they cast those ballots, they will, of course, go back to the residence where they are sequestered, and they will have a light dinner this evening. And you can certainly imagine that there will be lots of private conversations happening with various blocks among the College of Cardinals this evening.
And when it comes to those private conversations, obviously you said there won't be speeches heading into that first ballot, but what do you imagine those conversations are going to be like? Is it just about the person, or are there going to be conversations even at this point about the direction of the Catholic Church?
Yeah, I think most of the conversations we've heard about over the last few weeks have been about what direction, what profile these cardinals want of a new pope. But they have to get to business now. I mean, few among them have an appetite for a long conclave. I think they're keen to show that the church is, united and not divided in this moment. So they don't want to drag this out. So I think they will be doing real business tonight. And we know from accounts of previous conclaves that this is a moment where, cardinals take advantage of all being, staying under the same roof to, make sure they're acquainted and saying, you've never met so-and-so. Why don't you come sit at my table tonight? This is where the real business gets done.
This is, just to go into that a little more as well, Christopher, one of the interesting elements, isn't it? Because there are a lot of new cardinals. Pope Francis appointed a number of cardinals. They don't necessarily know each other. They come from all around the world. What is this meeting going to be like for them from that perspective?
That's right. There are more than 70 countries represented in this conclave. It's the largest and most diverse in history. And 80% of the men in that room have never done this before. So all of this, the procedure, the protocol is new, as well as the actual personalities in the room. And that just creates a very different dynamic of this conclave. I mean, it's on one hand, Pope Francis's great gift to the College of Cardinals was to radically diversify it. The downside for that, for many people, is the fact that it's leading to what some predict to be a fairly messy election because of the fact that there just hasn't been a chance for these personalities to be in the room for considerable periods of time, years on end.
It is such an incredible figure when you put it that way, that 80% have never gone through this process. Will they bring their own ideas for this process, or is the ritual and the tradition and the way that this has gone about pretty set?
Well, obviously, for anyone who's seen the film Conclave or knows anything about the Catholic Church, ritual is everything, and they've been doing this for over 1,000 years. These guidelines for the conclave have existed. So I think the actual ritual is set in stone. But what changes is the people. What changes are the needs of the church. And all of that adds into very different dynamics. They're coming off of a 12-year papacy that excited much of the church and much of the world around it. But it's no secret Pope Francis was polarizing inside the church, particularly those used to the ways of the past two pontificates before him. And so now, in a sense, they are having this moment as a referendum. Do we want to continue on the path of reform that Pope Francis initiated, of opening the church up to the world around it? Or do they want to initiate a course correction?
Christopher White of the National Catholic Reporter in Rome, thank you very much for joining us today. And finally, for today's show, for a last view from one of the countries that will be focusing on this conclave, we're going to turn to the nation with the largest number of Catholics in the world. That would be Brazil. Here's Monocle's Fernando Augusto Pacheco.
When it comes to Catholicism, Brazil beats everyone. It is the country with the highest number of Catholics in the world, and Catholic imagery and expressions are part of daily life. It is also the third country with the largest number of cardinals able to vote in the conclave, only behind Italy and the United States. Although Brazil holds a strong role in the conclave, neither of the 7 Brazilian cardinals are expected to become the new pope. The more likely is Dom Sérgio da Rocha, according to the bookies. But the Catholic Church should certainly not rest on its laurels on its biggest market. Although Pope Francis was a beloved figure in Brazil, the Church is struggling against competing religions, especially the evangelical churches, which are adding faithfuls in large numbers. It helps that they are incredibly organized and have a strong presence in the Brazilian Congress, TV channels, and more. The official number of Catholics in the country will be released in the coming months by the country's statistical agency. but we could see a large drop in the number of Catholics, like in the census of 2000 and 2010, a sharp drop from 73% to 64%. Besides the rise in the number of evangelicals, especially in the poor communities of the country, where people might perceive their local pastors as more present than the slightly more distant Catholic Church, and also among the young population, there is a rise in the number of people that don't identify with any religions or are atheists. The Catholic Church needs Brazil, and the next Pope's priority was certainly not only to add more faithfuls in growing regions for the faith in Africa and Asia, but also to connect again with Brazilians. Perhaps, like with Pope Francis, the first international trip of the new Pope should be the streets of Copacabana. For Monocle, I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco.
Fernando, thank you very much for that report. The final in our series on the view from other countries on the conclave. We will, of course, have much more from the Vatican on our shows, including the Monocle Daily at 1800 London time today. But that's all for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Hassan Anderson. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks, and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.